So good morning, we're on day 2 of the Integrate Summit. It's Mike Stevenson here. We're recording an episode of the Azure On Air podcast, and today I'm joined by my good friend Mattias Logdberg. So Mattias is from Sweden. I was very excited actually when I saw the session submissions for the Integrate Summit. And this session Mattias did yesterday was one of the first ones I picked because he talked a lot about the networking challenges for a PaaS solution in the context of an Azure integration and implementation. So that's something for me everybody's either struggling right now with or going to struggle with in the future. So when we were here doing the podcast, he's one of the first people I wanted to get on the call with us and just chat about the session yesterday, and how people can sort of benefit from some of his learnings in the future. So thanks for joining us, Mattias. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you do?
So yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. I live in Sweden, in Gävle, 1.5 hours north of Stockholm. So it's a small town. And I work at a company called DevUps, which we founded 2021. And the idea behind DevUps is like when you configure Azure resources, you have a wide span how you can configure them. And that's because Microsoft wants you to do a lot of things with those.
Yeah.
But we are doing integration. And we found out that doing that is harder than you want it to be. So what we do is scan all resources, and then we grade them based on this and based on integrations, especially in a level system, just to make sure how your security is, how your best practices, and by that we can then tell you where your weak spots are, where your good spots are, and you get the benefit of doing that. So in the end, you will have a comprehensive view of your whole environment, and you will also get guidelines how to move along and increase your security, for instance.
Yeah. So with the session yesterday, then what inspired you to want to do that session?
Oh, I've actually been asked about a bunch of customers, like that we found things on them when we do work with them with our service, and then they come to me and say like, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we understanding this?
Yeah.
So I've been doing small pieces of this for, I think it's 4 clients or something like just this year. So then I realized, or end of last year and this year, and then I realized this is a good topic for Integrate because this is something that we need more of.
Yeah. What are you thinking the challenges that those 4 customers faced? What were the key areas they struggled with?
I would say understanding the overview. So that's why I did it with the whiteboard, just to kind of get the whole overview, kind of understand what are the challenges, like everything from DNS going wrong to firewalls or someone, configured NSGs, network security groups, very hard, and understand why things go wrong. I think that's the idea.
So with for myself, having done cloud for a long time, I think one of the things I find interesting is it feels a lot more like a few years ago, cloud was very easy. And now as networking's become more prominent in cloud the last few years, things have got a lot more complicated. Oh, yeah. And it feels sometimes like, the challenges that we have are kind of moving back towards the BizTalk world. When we think about BizTalk environment setups, the challenge was, as a developer for BizTalk, it's easy to do it, but you have to bring in your SQL DBA, then you need your networking team and your Windows admin team. And so do you find that the part of the challenge is not just the technology, but the fact that you've got different stakeholders involved now as well?
Yeah, so I've had a bunch of discussions last day because people came up and talked to me about this after a session. And some of the people I'm talking to, they have their own networking team, so they say, we don't care, they do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to be agile, if you want to have speed in your delivery, you kind of need to do most of it yourself because you want the biceps, you want the deployment to be stable, you want to do that in one click.
Yeah.
So you as a developer need to understand the network a lot more than we did before. Sure, we can prep a lot of it. I mean, my drawing yesterday was a lot of overview. We talked about DevUps, we talked about why you can't log in and see this and that. Yeah. So it was a more wider portion, but still it's like a lot of it is around just understanding the small pieces, like why do I use private endpoints? What happens when I do public access disabled? Yeah. Or when I use a service endpoint, what's happening in the real life? Because you as a developer need to understand that. As an architect, you really do, but as developers as well.
Yeah. Because I think for me, the bit that really resonated yesterday was, so anyone who hasn't seen the session yet, Mattias does a lot of kind of freehand diagrams to explain the concepts he's doing. And that idea of you've got, if I'm right, it was like a hub and spoke network model. One bit's got the integration in, but understanding the DNS routes to resolve the private endpoint crossing through the network peer. And I think it's so difficult for people who are developers to really understand how that impacts their solution, isn't it?
It is, because as soon as you're on the public internet, everything just works.
Yeah.
And as soon as you go on private, it just stops working.
Yeah.
And you have no clue.
Yeah.
And there's not really an easy way to find it either. So if you have a DNS problem, it's not like your function app or your logic app will tell you, I have a DNS problem. They will just say, no, not working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think that is one of the biggest thing that we do not really get the errors that we need to have.
Yeah.
So that's why we need to have the understanding. Yeah.
So where do your journey of getting to where you are now has obviously been quite painful, and you've done a lot of learning during that journey over a few years. Where are the places you go to learn about the things you need to help you with these problems?
So I usually find a friend or two. That's how I do it.
Yeah.
So I had a good help from a guy called Simon Wåhlin in Sweden.
Yeah.
Because he's doing a lot of hard networking stuff. So before this session, I learned a bunch of new things actually.
Yeah. So I guess that's the really important bit, isn't it? It's the networking from a personal perspective, not just from a technology perspective. You need to go and find out what these other teams in your organization do and build bridges to be able to talk to people about that.
Yeah, because even if you can read all of this on Microsoft Learn and all of that, it's not really that easy to get the perspective from, okay, how does this actually work in production? How is this actually working in a big environment when there is like hundreds of spokes? I mean, I have no clue, but when I can talk to people who have that, give a lot to me. Both sharing my experience with others, but also like gaining experience from others is an important thing.
So what would you, if I was kind of coming to you for advice, what would be the top maybe 2 or 3 things you would say in this space people should watch out for or should try to do to be successful?
I think the most important part is getting to understand that what happens when I isolate my services. Like, what happens when I have my private endpoints and I turn off the public access?
Yeah. And
understanding the route for your company. Is it a VPN into my on-premise that's going to help me? Do I need a jump server on an Azure VNet? That's kind of the thing you need to understand from that perspective. And then also get that overview from, are we using their service endpoints? Why do we use them? And so forth. So we can be productive in that.
Yeah.
Also a little bit around DNS, was not understanding DNS, but just kind of what is a private DNS zone? Why do we use them? And why is a public DNS? You don't need to understand it in depth, but it's good to have like an idea of why.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things is some of these networking resources aren't really expensive if you're doing it at small scale, so it's worth people playing around with like your own sort of MSDN credits or something to learn how to do the routing for private resources, I guess, is a good way for learning it.
It is, and if you go ahead and you gain private resources and you do small steps, but the problem is that you will face really quick is DNS. So that's the one you need to do.
Yeah.
So you need to start on the DNS side.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your private DNS zones won't pick up correctly, or you will hijack them right in and I quote hijacking. but that's because to get it to work. And so read up a little bit about the private resolver and that part as well.
And I guess the problem, I know we were talking a bit with Bill this week about the challenge of sometimes, especially in integration, some of your resources will be private, but then you still need the public ones to kind of work. Can you talk a little bit about what that problem was about?
Yeah, so Bill had this issue about iPaaS management. He deployed an internal version of iPaaS management. And since the STV2, I think it is, they require a public IP for the management. So it's a public IP for, I think it's 3443, and you need to have that allowed inbound. But Bill had a very restrictive team, so everything was locked down.
Yeah.
So what you can do in that case is, and this is also something that we need to learn a little bit about as well, is that there's something called a service tag. So you can put up a service tag for iPaaS management to be allowed on 3443 in the NSG, and then that traffic will come in, but only for iPaaS management, so nothing else. So that was his issue, was that they blocked everything in, and then everything fails. But as soon as he could apply that rule,
Service
which
side,
he of course didn't have the permission to do, so he needed the networking team to go in and do it, and that's where we are again.
Yeah, and I guess that always comes back to the people problem, isn't it? It's like you need not to know what you need to do, but also you need to know what you need other people to do to help.
Yeah, and permission-wise as well, because usually if you are at a more sensitive client, they are locked in. You have no access to do anything in this space because they are really scared you will mess up, for good reasons, because you can mess up. And then you really need to ping that person. It's just like the old days. I need an IP port opening. It's the same thing, more or less.
Yeah. So what things sort of excite you at the summit this week for the future things you think you'll be doing over the next 6 to 12 months, Mattias?
So I really liked from yesterday and from today. I would say I really like the new things that's coming up, both from Logic App Standard. I really like the stuff they're doing with testing and everything. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Also really like the API Center. I haven't really looked into that before, but from a management or operations perspective, it's actually nice. If you have a big organization, need to be a little bit strict. Really good.
Yeah. And what about for your own projects that you're working on? What do you think would be the things you'd like to hear from Microsoft by the next Integrate that would make your life a lot easier?
I would like to have APA management, the V2 tires with private endpoints. That would be my biggest yay, that's what I want.
Yeah, so that kind of keeps them on the much more on the PaaS side of things with private entry, And
exactly.
So in terms of DevUps, then if we come back to what your company do, so you're obviously a specialist in the security area. What are the key things that you think DevUps are sort of focusing on over the next 6 months to a year around Azure?
So from our point of view, what we are doing is getting into an ISV in Azure with our service, because that's going to make it easier for us. We also want to go more into containers, actually, to be more looking into that. It's a bigger area, more and more. We see more people going there.
I guess you'll see the announcements this week about containers will be quite aligned with what your plans are there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we see a lot of action there, and we also see the hybrid model coming up from Microsoft as well, which also comes with containers, so forth. So that's going to be a big topic for us as well.
Yeah, good. And so you do a lot of community speaking as well, don't you? So where are some of the things you might be speaking at, or what community content will you be doing over the next?
So I'm organizing a few conferences. So the next one coming up is Swetug in Sweden, in Gothenburg in September, I think it is. So that's the next thing. I think I have the same session I have here there, actually.
Yeah. So definitely a go-to session if you're in Sweden.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what for yourself then, putting the networking aside for a moment, what are the other things in the integration space that you're quite interested in trying out? I mean, you mentioned API Center a little bit, but is there any other things you've seen here this week that?
Just for curiosity or for experimental, I really want to try out the hybrid model that Logic Apps is coming with, because it's an interesting way of getting rid of BizTalk. I would say. A lot of old, public sector and stuff like that that still can't move away from BizTalk. It's going to be really cool to see how that play out.
So if I'm right, so I've chatted to a few Swedish people before. They tell me about some of the sort of political and sort of compliance challenges that are quite particular to Sweden for BizTalk migrations to Azure. Do you know a little bit about how those kind of come into play?
Sorry, again.
So I was chatting to a few guys that some of the adoption blockers for people moving BizTalk to Azure are some of the political things in Sweden, where there's extra requirements that make that challenging.
Yeah, there are, but we also see a movement of that. So my contacts at Microsoft Sweden, we talk about this a bit, and they say it's a movement going on.
Yeah.
There are pilot projects that showcase that this is okay, and as we said, if we can have that hybrid model with running on premise, that kind of sort of things, it's loosening things up.
So do you think there'll be a sort of trend with companies where they'll have maybe a containerized Logic Apps on-prem, but also have some stuff in the cloud so they can kind of get the best of both worlds, maybe?
Yeah, if you have the requirement for it and the staff for it, because running containers on-prem still needs some stuff, people doing it. But I see that. I see a customer doing that, especially big ones.
Yeah.
Or where they need to have zones or private sectors as well.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And So coming back to DevUps for a second, so you guys focus mainly on the security side of things. Do you do any other kind of consultancy other than the security things? Are you implementing, or do you really stay in that
So
security
what we do as a consultancy, or we do, so around our service, we are giving advice as well. So we consultancy advising and education and
Yeah.
A little bit of hands-on, workshops and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
So it's really, that education piece for helping a customer understand how to do this themselves. That's good to hear.
Yeah, we try to see ourselves as trying to coach our customers to get, from a starting point where you maybe not know so much, and in the end you're going on your own, and you can use our services to be rolling away and feeling secure about what you're doing.
Yeah, confidence. So do you find? I guess there's a lot of relationships between what you're doing to some of the stuff I'm doing with cost management, of kind of keeping it, like acting as a guardian in a way where you keep an eye on how they're doing. So what kind of process would you do with a customer around a review? If they I guess they must have to have a need to know that they're not confident about their solution when they reach out to you.
Yeah, so usually it's because they're maybe not confident, but they don't have control. I think that's the one or not confident or not understanding. Like it feels like a black box, because then we can give. So one day it's a health check, which will then do a report. You will get one time. We'll go through everything. You will get a report, and then you will have your insights. You will understand how good compliant you are to everything that we scan for. So everything from how many open endpoints do you have to, like, are you using RBAC roles instead of static keys and so forth. So you'll have the whole span. So that's kind of the starting point, and then usually we help them to get to the next level, which means that they start using our services to be able to be working on their own, and then also we can coach them on the way, like, okay, but these private endpoints, how do we really do, or how do they work? And then we can go in and say, okay, but this works like this, and we talk to the network team and we help them put things up on the side, and then we help them enabling that as advising. And then when they enable that, a new thing comes up maybe, and then we do that and we help them consult.
Yeah, excellent. So with if we come back to the Azure resources for a moment, if I'm doing private networking on my AIS solution, which of the resources do you think are the most challenging to deal with?
I would say Logic Apps is one of them.
Right.
Because there's two things with Logic Apps. One is the setup. So you always need to have a storage account, which you also need for functions. It's a function runtime that needs. But the thing that people are missing out is that the storage account needs 4 private endpoints to be able to work with Logic Apps. So that's the first thing that miss out. And then it's the connectors, because when you're inside the VNet and you force your traffic inside the VNet, you will can only use built-in connectors to be inside the VNet. And people are very used to use the managed connectors, so they start building with managed connectors, and then everything fails when they go into the production. They don't understand. So that's why. I think that's the small pieces of knowledge around this is a big
I think dependency,
bang in the wall.
It's that dependency management, isn't it? The more dependencies you've got, then they all need the private networking implemented with them as well, isn't it? What about other services on Azure that you find challenging? I mean, Logic Apps is obviously really prominent for everybody to integrate, but is there other services that you've worked with customers that you find ones that are challenging?
I think what I see is like people putting up application gateway in many ways, and usually they are let's just say that if you give the developers free hands, there's usually no rules left. So I think that is a challenge as well, that you put up a good architecture, someone is doing a good picture, but you don't really understand the security anyway. So you kind of end up opening up everything, and it's even less secure just because you're feeling secure because the network team draw up a nice picture, and then when people come in and develop, they don't really understand it, so they start turning things off to get things working, and then in the end you end up in an environment that is not secure at all.
Sort of security that becomes, by obscurity, that becomes unsecure.
Exactly.
I think it's an interesting kind of area that when you bring up app gateways, for example, I think a lot of people struggle with the idea that I've got data coming into my solution, but I've got things like front door, but I've got APIM and then app gateway, load balancer, and it's not just one or the other, I can combine different combinations of that. So there's so many different ways you can do it. It's quite confusing, I think, isn't it? Do you have like is that a common conversation for you, and do you have preferences on that?
I'm going to use the consultant word. It depends.
Yeah.
But the problem is like, how complex do you want your environment to be?
Yeah.
As you said, you can use front door or application gateway, and you can use them in combination, and you can load balancer both before and after and so forth. And the thing is, I would say try to keep it simple. That's what I would advise you to do, because it's easier to have a simple implementation and then go to a more complex one.
Yeah.
Because the problem comes when you start saying, hey, I need to be in 2 different regions, and I need to have this traffic balanced, or I need to have this based on like a front door, because the front door is a global resource.
Yeah.
So if you have that, you need to route it to different regions.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start with that, it starts getting complex. It's nothing wrong, but it starts getting complex. And then you need to understand how's the routing going, how's the DNS going. So when you start routing into region A, then you need a DNS setup for that.
Yeah.
And then if you route to region B, you need a DNS setup for that. And all of that is starting to really quickly become complicated.
Yeah. So keep it simple is the big takeaway from today's chat.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start putting these after each other, and you have, as we architect call it, a perfect solution, because we overdo things. We tend to do that. Then it's like it starts getting complicated.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we're just about at time, Mattias. Huge thank you for joining us on Azure on Air. Great job this week. That would be, there's a few sessions I'm going to make a point of really watching the videos when they come out. That's one of them, because I think it's such an important area, not just for integration, but generally for any kind of a solution you're building on Azure. I think everybody should watch that. But thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.